So you might have heard this name floating around in some pretty interesting cognitive science circles, Jason Brisart. But who is he, really? And what is this mysterious sealed archive all about? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into. Okay, so if you go to the Brisart Research Archive website, this is the very first thing that hits you. A sealed archive of advanced cognitive frameworks. I mean, that sounds pretty intense, right? Almost like something out of a sci-fi movie. It just makes you wonder, what on earth is inside? All right, so to really get what this sealed archive is, we've got to start with the guy who built it. So on paper, Jason Brisart is an independent researcher. His specialties are theoretical cognitive science and consciousness studies. Pretty heavy stuff. But here's the key thing. He's not just a philosopher pondering the big questions. He's more like an architect. He is actually building formal, structured models to explain the deep mechanics of how our minds work. And when you look at the key words from his work, you can see he's going after the big ones: consciousness, identity, free will, emotion, the whole shebang. He's digging for the absolute fundamentals. But what's really fascinating, and this is the key to understanding him, is that all of this super complex, high-level research didn't start in some university lab. Nope, it started with a deeply personal problem he was trying to solve for himself. And that brings us to his origin story. Because, look, to really get Brisart's work, you have to understand the puzzle he was living with. He explains it so well in one of his blog posts. He says, "I didn't always know who I was, not because I lacked identity, but because I had too many." He describes this feeling of having all these different versions of himself that would pop up depending on who he was with and then just fade away when the moment passed. Now, at first, he thought something was wrong with him. That he was fragmented, that he didn't have a solid, stable core self. But the more he looked at it, he started to see a pattern. It wasn't just chaos. It was actually a highly structured system of adjustment, a kind of constant fine-tuning or calibration happening in response to the world around him. And this realization was a total game changer for him. He wrote, "The loop was never the problem, it was the mechanism that made me real." Just think about that for a second. He completely reframed his personal struggle. That internal feedback system wasn't a flaw, it wasn't a bug, it was the feature. It was the very engine that was building his sense of self. So he took this incredibly personal insight and made it his life's work. He started building these detailed frameworks to map out exactly how these internal mechanisms operate. You could almost say he was trying to write a user's manual for that inner loop that's inside all of us. The first major framework is called Simulation Synchronization Theory, or SST for short. The basic idea is that your self isn't this solid, unchanging thing. Instead, your brain is constantly running all these little what-if simulations about who you are, and then it tests them and refines them based on the social and emotional feedback you get from others. And this is where emotion comes in, and it's absolutely crucial. For Brisart, emotion isn't just some messy byproduct. As he puts it, it's the tuning fork. It's the signal that tells your system which of those simulations to keep and which ones to get rid of, literally tuning your identity to your environment. This brings us to his next big idea, the Intent Resolution Engine, or IRE. And this one tackles something we have all felt. You know that feeling when you know exactly what you need to do, but you just can't? Well, IRE frames this not as a moral failing or weak willpower, but as a mechanical problem of competing signals inside your brain. And you can really feel the empathy at the core of his work here. He writes, "There's a quiet kind of suffering that comes with wanting to act, but not being able to." The crucial point is that this reframes things like procrastination. It suggests we don't just need to try harder, we need to understand the internal system that's causing the gridlock in the first place. And then we have the third piece of the puzzle, the temporal feedback loop, or TFL. This one zooms in on our experience of time itself. It describes this constant, recursive loop where our present awareness is always being shaped by our memories of the past and our simulations of the future. And what holds it all together? Once again, emotion is the stabilizing signal. And here is where it gets really cool. Because these three frameworks, TFL, SST, and IRE, aren't separate ideas. They're designed to be interlocking parts of one single system. The TFL anticipates outcomes. The SST tests our identity against that feedback, and the IRE selects which behavior to go with. It's a complete, self-regulating loop for our entire cognitive identity. So the ideas themselves are pretty mind-bending, but the way he shares them is just as unconventional, which really makes him a new kind of researcher. Just think about the traditional academic path. You're tied to a university, you're chasing grants, and your theories might sit in development for years. Brisart's model is completely different. He's independent, and instead of just publishing papers, he licenses his fully developed frameworks directly to labs. He actually calls his archive an external theory division they can just plug into their research. And make no mistake, this is not just a thought experiment. It's a serious business. An annual academic license to the Brisart Research Archive costs a cool $50,000. That price tag sends a very clear message. These aren't just blog posts. They are high-value, research-ready tools for serious scientific work. So what does that 50 grand get you? Well, you get full access to all his frameworks, current and future. You get permission to use them and publish your own research. You can even develop your own non-commercial extensions. And crucially, each framework comes with a unique citation code, so it can be a legitimate part of the scientific record. Okay, so let's zoom out and tie this all together. What is the ultimate goal of all this work? When you boil it all down, it's about mapping the inner world. And Brisart himself isn't shy about the deeper implications. He writes, "I never set out to blend science and spirituality, but it turns out that when we treat the inner world as structurally real, the boundary gets a lot harder to maintain." He's basically using the rigorous language of science to map experiences that have, for centuries, been the territory of philosophy and spirituality. And that, right there, is why this matters. This isn't just abstract theory. As Brisart says, his work is a mirror. It's designed to reflect those hidden, recursive feedback loops that are constantly running inside us, shaping our sense of self, our perception of time, and our ability to act. And so we'll end with a question that Brisart poses himself. The loop is always running. The question is whether you're letting it run you, or you're aware enough to tune it. By providing a map of that loop, Jason Brisart's work isn't just explaining who we are. It might just be giving us the tools to change it.